We're here in the studio of Cheap Joe's Art Stuff in Boone, North Carolina with artist Linda Kemp, and we're going to talk to Linda about what she does. And the name of your class is?
It's Transforming Imagery, Negative Painting Techniques.
Okay. So can you explain to us what a negative, can we
Sure.
show an example of?
Sure, we can talk about that. Really, negative painting isn't just about a particular type of subject. You can paint landscapes, you can paint florals. Most recently, I've been working with some animals, fox and rabbits, and some birds, and having a lot of fun practicing with these ideas. But negative painting is just an alternative way that you approach a subject.
Okay.
So in my case, what I try to do is depict an image or change my ideas and lead towards abstraction. And with negative painting, rather than painting the object, you create it by painting the space around it.
Okay.
And we build in layers, and so there's certain strategies that we use and approaches that are just a little bit different, and a lot of people find it very helpful, especially if they've struggled with the painting. This is just a different way of thinking and building their pieces.
So it's the way you're approaching your teaching
Yes.
is kind of helping them into the painting.
Correct. Absolutely, absolutely. And that's my goal as a teacher, is to help people become better painters and give them some joy in their painting.
Right.
And so we work on the strategies, and I definitely have a very methodical way that I work through the paintings, and that's my goal, is to teach them how to look at the subject, how to analyze it, how to figure out how they can slice it down into layers, because we do work with layers.
Okay.
And then they learn how to see it, how to decipher it, how to transfer that imagery onto their canvas, and then building the layers. So we're building it, and how to finish it. So we like to go from start to finish, working with this approach or technique.
So you start with something realistic or representational, and
Typically,
you kind of
yes.
turn it into,
It's like working on a puzzle.
okay,
So you look at the subject and you say, all right, now, how do I take that imagery and transfer it into a painting? How do I decipher it?
Right.
Or what is the puzzle?
Right.
And that's how I look at it. It's a game working its way through from start to finish.
So for instance, how did this, is this the right?
Sure, yeah,
How did
absolutely.
that start? How did that?
Well, in this one, I did have some imagery in mind,
Okay.
and that being some sort of growing plants along a beach or shoreline.
Okay.
And I wanted to suggest that. So that meant having the imagery and a background and a foreground. And I knew I wanted to have the light area down at the bottom. So I started off with an underpainting. And an underpainting is the foundation that I use to establish the color scheme
Okay.
and the textures in the early stages, and just to lay down my original thoughts.
Right.
And then I start to paint around my objects. So in this case, I started with the mid-value, and then I worked in the darks, and I finished with the lights,
Okay.
which is a very typical way of working with acrylics. With watercolors, generally we go from light, middle value to dark,
Right.
but with our acrylics we can go up and down
Okay.
the value scale.
So is this?
Switch around.
Switch.
Yeah, that's great. So this was actually the demonstration that I did yesterday. We worked on the landscape, and we took it from start to finish.
Okay.
So with the landscape, with negative painting, what I do is I start with the thing that's closest to me, so the foreground.
Right.
And I build foreground to the middle ground to the background.
Okay.
And we did an experimental underpainting. This is on clayboard, which
Right.
is so much fun to work on. And
So it's got a gessoed surface on
it's a very smooth surface, and yet it is somewhat porous.
Okay.
So we dampen the paper, and then we use a bristle brush
it. Okay.
and apply the color. So it's a downward brush stroke, and we build up these layers to suggest grass is blowing.
Okay.
And that's all done in the very first layer, and we take that from the bottom to the top. And once that sets up and dries, then I start to carve around the outside shape of my tree forms in the back, and pop in the little capture negatives, and paint in what you might think of as being the sky, but basically it's blocking out the tops of trees, and that's it.
Right.
So this is really such an easy and simplified method of building up a landscape without having to go in with little brush and painting every blade of grass or weeds blowing. That's all done in the underpainting stage.
So when you teach, is it mostly this, what is this, 8 by 8, 10 by 10?
When I'm traveling, I work with small pieces because it has to be portable to go in my suitcase and on the plane and so on. At home, I work very large as well as doing some small pieces. So you can work enormous, big mural size with it. Bigger brushes, long arms, stand back and have a look, but absolutely can work with it.
Well, you know, this kind of reminds me of when Ted Nuttall was here.
Yes.
He talked about the background being almost as important
Absolutely.
as the foreground.
Absolutely.
And it looks like that's what you're doing. The background is very interesting. And then you've got a representational
we have a figure,
right.
whether it be a person
Right.
or an animal or a flower.
Right.
You know, that's positive. That's the
Right.
imagery, and then we build around it. And with the negative space, that is every bit as much as important as the positive. That's
Right.
what establishes it, especially as a negative painter, because as a negative painter, your shapes and your edges tell the story.
Okay.
We don't rely on inside details.
Okay.
Some of those are added as embellishments at the end, but yeah, this dark shape and this light shape and playing against darks against light against a darker area, and blocking it in so that it's an interesting balance of these geometric shapes is all part of the game in building it up.
So at home, you may have made that into a 20 by 30 or
Could do, yeah,
11 by 17
Sure.
or whatever.
Yeah. Although I must say, I love working on the little pieces too. They're just a joy, and
Put a nice frame around it.
and you're all set,
and
yeah,
that's it.
and that's it.
So getting away from painting a little bit, when you come to a class, you have a responsibility to your students
Yes.
to give them something. And
Correct.
so what do you want them to leave with at the end of your 5
Right.
days together?
I want them to have a pleasurable time
Okay.
when they're working with me. I also want them to be faced with some challenges too,
Okay, yeah.
because that's how we learn.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I want them, when they leave, I want them to know how to start a piece, how to build it, and how to finish it.
Okay.
And not just the piece that I did as a demonstration. I want them to be able to go home and be able to look at their own photos or their own sketchbook and say, all right, I know how I'm going to start this,
Okay.
and I have a strategy for the colors that I'm going to use, because we do talk about that. Not a formula, not a recipe, but choosing colors according to the mood or one of the color properties, the hue, the value, the intensity, and how to layer it up. I want them to know when to use transparent colors, when to use opaque colors, and what they're going to do. But most important, I want them to feel confident when they go home that they can do this.
Okay.
And that's my whole goal. I don't keep secrets from them. Anybody who paints with me will tell you that I really try hard to help people have success with their paintings.
And that's pretty much all you can ask for, right?
That's right.
I mean, so back to Linda.
Yes.
When did you discover your ability or your love for painting?
I don't think there was a time that I didn't paint.
Okay.
I remember as a little wee girl that's all I wanted to do was paint
Okay.
or explore nature. Bringing rocks home and bringing tin rocks to church in my purse and all the rest. But painting is something I have always done. It's something it's my favorite thing to do. I have no balance in my life. It's just about painting
Okay.
and coming up with projects for students or writing about art. It's what I love to do, and I always have. I don't know what I'd do without it. It's everything to me.
So when did you get into teaching?
Oh, as a teenager, my sister and I ran an Opportunities for Youth program, so it was a government grant that we got, and we set up classes in the summertime for children to come, and we started teaching painting classes. I don't know that we really knew what we were doing, but we decided we were going to teach, and that's what we did, and I've learned from that, but I've pretty much always taught at one level or another, and then as time goes by, somebody would say, oh, well, do you do a workshop? And I've always said, yeah, sure, I'll do that, and it just grew from there and to where I am now, that I have the opportunity to travel all over the world.
So how many workshops do you do per year now?
Well, I used to do about 24 workshops a year, so almost every other week I was on the road traveling. More recently, I've backed it off a bit, and I'm doing about 10 to 12 workshops a year.
So you're painting more at
I'm
home?
painting more, and that's just the best, to be able to have time in the studio and paint and figure out things to help my students, as well as myself, to make better paintings and challenge myself, which is really important.
Well, having interacted with your students,
Yes.
I have a new perspective of what really goes on, and it's not only your students getting something from you, you're getting something from them too.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's about fulfilling those expectations
Yes,
too.
absolutely.
And
And sometimes a student will say to me, well, how would you do this? They'll have a question, something that they want to apply to their own work. And that gives me pause to think, well, how would I do that?
Right.
And I have to come up with a way of tackling that, because I don't always know
a solution, right?
a solution for it. So I have to think about it, and that has been just wonderful for me. I think many of the things that I teach and put in my lessons are an attempt to answer students' questions as far as, well, how would you do that? I know I had a student one time say to me, well, how would you paint ferns? And we were sitting at a little roadside place having some lunch, and there were ferns across the street, and I sat and I looked and I said, well, I had to think about it really quickly, and I looked at it and I thought, okay, here's how we're going to do it. And that led to more things, and that's what happens when somebody asks me, how would you do this?
Right.
I have to come up with a way of doing it.
And in light of that, it's interesting that the people that control the educational purse strings get rid of art. And art really is about problem solving.
It is.
It's about
It
like
certainly
your
can
approach
be.
to it.
Sure.
Here's what I want to do. Here's the problem. How do you represent
That's
that?
right.
Yeah.
And I think that's not just with the negative painting, but with so many artists. We look at a scene or a photo or something, and we're drawn to it, and as painters, we naturally say, how would I paint that?
Right.
What color would you use? How would I make this visual effect happen?
Right.
How would I create this atmosphere? And that, to me, is actually what motivates me to paint, is solving those problems, whatever it is that I come across and leaves me awestruck or leaves me inspired, and I think, how would I interpret that imagery and put it onto canvas?
So you've got warm and cool, complementary, tertiary,
Right.
all that stuff. I mean,
Whatever,
it
and
seems
limit
like-
it down
yeah.
to one or two.
It seems like, especially in this painting, I think of Robert Burge and what he calls his spice color,
Sure.
where you kind of, this is where your eye's going to go, to that spice color.
To the
That's,
spice. Well, we've
yeah.
got contrast here
Right.
too, because we've got light against dark,
Right.
so we've got complementary colors going on.
Right.
And then we've also got the light and dark, so I'm taking advantage of both of those
Right.
color properties, the contrast of hue as well as the contrast of value.
Right.
And I'll tell you, Bob is a good pal of mine. We talk about this stuff. Anybody listening to us talk at a dinner table might wonder what on earth we're all getting excited about contrast and spice colors.
Yeah. So where do you go from here?
Oh, I'm just loving working with these little animal pieces and deciphering that. So these are good challenges for me, and I like that. I'm particularly focused on working with my acrylics now. I've worked in watercolors for many years, and acrylics came into my life about 15 years ago, and finding a great devotion to them. I love them. So exploring new imagery and figuring out how I can lay that down and put it into paint. Those are my main objectives.
And physically, you go back to Canada, and then you go someplace else.
I do, yeah. Actually, my next trip is to Vermont to the Holbein event, which I go to every year, and that's a great fun thing to do as well. So
it'll be a nice change from Boone.
It's great, yeah. How lucky is this to be able to travel all over the world and meet wonderful people and paint and talk about painting. It's just great.
So in closing, do you have any special Cheap Joe's story or that you would like to leave with, or?
Well, I would just have to say Joe is a wonderful person. I adore him, and we have our yearly visit when I come down and catch up on life and talk about art and share a meal and have a good visit, and it's just wonderful. I'm just amazed at how kind he is and how generous with so much. And he also introduced me to a particular kind of ice cream that we didn't have in Canada, and so he took me to Cold Stone, I think it was called. Something like that. This great ice cream place. So
in Blowing Rock?
I think that's where we were.
It was Kilwins.
We went for ice cream together, so
and they do the Mackinac fudge.
All kinds of cool stuff.
They do,
so it's so neat to meet this person and know he's just got the best heart and he likes ice cream, and we have fun together. We talk about art, life. It's good.
So you have a website too?
I do.
And
easy to find, www.lindakemp.com.
Okay.
So that's easy, and you can see some of my artwork, and I have some of my new critter pieces on there, and as well as some older pieces, watercolors, acrylics, and I have some sample lessons on there as well. So if somebody was interested in learning how to do this technique, the basics of it, they can just follow along. There's also information on YouTube that I've done some videos.
Oh, good.
But a real simple step-by-step. The other thing that I have that has been really fun recently is I started a Facebook group called Negative Painting Addicted. And in just 6 months, we've grown to over 6,000 members.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And people are welcome to post their attempts at negative painting. The ones they're struggling with as well as the ones that they've had great success with. And all different mediums, as well as some people are painting porcelain and different things. And that's just been just an amazing experience to see how people from all over the world are embracing these ideas and applying them to their own work, because it's not just limited to one style of painting.
Right.
Any subject, any medium, any sort of approach that you want to do, then you can try these ideas. So that's it.
Well, that's it, and thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us and the 10,000 people that are going to watch us on YouTube.
Well, that's
so
great.
Check out lindakemp.com, and we'll post this interview soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go back and finish up our bird paintings. Thanks, Terry.